everything he just said is absolutely false, but I'm not surprised.
Really? The fact is that everything he's saying so far is simply a lie.
He's averaging an incredible 13.5 false claims per day.
Trump spewing this blatant lie.
I counted at least 22 false claims from Donald Trump.
He managed to pack 5 lies into 140 characters.
They are the same lies over and over again.
You're entitled to your point of view, Mr. President, but you're not entitled to your own set of facts.
Hi again, everybody. It's 5 o'clock in the East. Throughout Donald Trump's time in our politics, there has been an added responsibility, a burden really, placed on anyone opposing him and everyone covering him. The responsibility to fact check the barrage of lies he spews at an alarmingly high and growing rate. Trump lies about things big and important and small and meaningless. The size of his crowds, the results of the 2020 presidential election, immigration statistics, COVID statistics, economic indicators, the fact that Mexico would pay for his wall, his knowledge or familiarity with Project 2025 crime rates, and what actually happened on January 6th. You get the picture. The Washington Post counted that Trump lied more than 30,000 times while he was president, and the rate of those lies, as we said, increased as the years went on. Trump's lying has, of course, continued since he's been out of office, defeated by Joe Biden. At the debate against President Joe Biden in late June, he lied more than 30 times in 90 minutes, and it was barely mentioned in the coverage that ensued. And there was yesterday's incoherent, rambling, nonsensical, grievance-filled press conference yesterday at Mar-a-Lago that garnered wall-to-wall media coverage. In it, Trump uttered more and more lies, including the outrageous false claim that more people attended his January 6th insurrection in Washington, D.C. than were at Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. He said that. Our network fact-checked him immediately, which is no easy feat considering the sheer volume of lies. And very soon after the networks did their fact-checking came the fact-check to end all fact-checks from the Harris-Walz campaign. A thorough, itemized, pithy takedown, not just with the facts, but with the evidence and the receipts and a bit of cleverness and humor, an epic and important trolling of the ex-president that we can only assume made his blood boil. The list the Harris-Walz campaign provided, we read most of it on the air, was 31 fact checks. It was important for a lot of reasons, not just because it got the truth out immediately, but it's a really important and healthy display of this campaign's competence and strategy for the next 88 days. Be quick, be straightforward, be accurate, mix in a little bit of humor, and wouldn't hurt to be a little sharp-edged while you do it. They called it, quote, Donald Trump's very good, very normal press conference, and proceeded to say things like this, quote, we work to pin down reality so Donald Trump, bless his heart, doesn't have to. Here are a few of their fact checks again. People have spoken to bigger crowds than Donald Trump, Obama, Clinton, literally anyone at Lollapalooza, Coachella, or the World Cup. Trump said they have commercials at a level no one else does. He's being drastically outspent on the airways. Governor Josh Shapiro is actually a great guy. Trump said he was not complaining. He, in fact, very much was. Trump does not know the difference between asylum seekers and an insane asylum. After-birth abortion does not exist. Minnesota and Virginia are not the same. There are no polls that say Donald Trump is going to win in a landslide. This afternoon, the campaign pushed their fact-checking endeavors even further, putting out a second press release on what they called Trump's temper tantrum, this time with many visuals and many quotes from publications, further correcting and pushing back against his copious lies. As we take stock of that powerful display by the Harris-Walz campaign, begs the question, has Trump finally met his match as a liar? Questions where we start the hour with some of our favorite experts and friends. Staff writer for The Atlantic, author of the book Autocracy, Inc., The Dictators Who Want to Run the World, Anne Applebaum is here. Plus, president of Media Matters for America, Angelo Carusone is back. And former RNC spokesman, host of the Bulwark podcast, MSNBC political analyst Tim Miller's here. Anne, I want you just to help us understand why the truth is such a lethal threat to a wannabe autocrat.
So what autocrats do is they seek to shape reality in a way that suits them. And this has a couple of purposes. You know, sometimes the person lying does so not in order to convince people, but just to show how powerful he is. He's so powerful, he's so important that he can lie. He can shape reality. Nobody can stop him. Nobody can prevent him. And that's something you see in dictatorships all over the world. Another purpose sometimes is to create this sense of uncertainty and unclarity that makes people feel they don't really know what's true and what's not. If you keep lying, repeatedly over and over again, contradicting yourself, saying first one thing, then another, eventually you give people the feeling that they'll never know what's true. And why should they participate in political life if it's just full of lies and crazy stuff that they can't understand? It's a way of making people feel apathetic and making them feel like they don't want to be part of politics. And, these are tactics used in Russia. They're used by dictatorships all over the world, and they are also used by Donald Trump.
Donald Trump, I think, first displayed his commitment to the first thing you're explaining to us, this alternate reality, when he went to the CIA of all places, like an institution rooted in truths that protect the lives, not just of Americans, but of our allies around the world, and stood in front of the wall that honors those who have lost their lives anonymously serving the CIA, and talked about his crowd size. And I remember watching it. I think I was on the air live, and I remember watching it with my jaw on the floor. But it gets at the second thing you're describing. The lies are so audacious and about things so previously sacred that they're disorienting. Talk about that as a tactic.
It's a tactic used to, as I said, to make people feel like there's no point in participating. It also makes people who are part of government institutions unsure of what their jobs were going to be. I mean, the lie that I remember really well at the beginning of the Trump administration was when he claimed that his crowd size on the mall during the inauguration was the biggest ever, and he tried to get the National Park Service to lie about it. And that's one further step. That's getting people whose job it is to monitor crowds and to take care of, keep the grass clean, and people who are dedicated to protecting our national parks and who have environmental training. That's trying to get them to participate in his fantasy. And that is an extraordinarily dangerous thing to do. I mean, it was a little thing, it was stupid and people laughed at it, but it was an attempt to bend reality so that he would both frighten people and scare people away from politics.
Angelo, my colleague Lawrence O'Donnell let me just show you what he did. Did something rather extraordinary on his broadcast last night. Let me play a little bit of it.
It was 2016 all over again today. Donald Trump spoke at his home in Florida for over an hour, and all of the cable news networks, including this one, carried it live, just like they all did repeatedly in 2016. It would be hard to find a sentence in what Donald Trump said today that did not include at least one lie. We went back 9 years in the press coverage of the campaign, the media coverage. Donald Trump gets credit from the people he lied to today for lying to them. They appreciate it. Reporters understandably and incorrectly believe that the most important thing a candidate can do is answer their questions. But they don't know what an answer actually is. Words spoken after their question marks are not necessarily answers and are never answers when they come from Donald Trump.
I played that because Harris actually did answer questions yesterday. She walked to the press before she got on the plane. She answered all of their questions. I don't think they were shouting at her when she walked away. And I don't know that everyone was even sitting in her live events. We were, because we heard they were happening when we were on the air. But just explain to me, in any way you want to, anecdotal, systemic, why the press is still struggling with how to cover Donald Trump.
I mean, in part, I think a few reasons. One, I think in part it ties in with what Anne was talking about before, that this is what happens when you're confronted with this avalanche of lies. You flood the zone and then they drown. They haven't adapted. And that in some ways is a failure of the industry to sort of figure out a new approach that is professional, but is also responsive to that moment. there's also another part that's just basic muscle memory, which is that I think it's worth keeping in mind that this is the first election in 30 years. First election in 30 years where Rush Limbaugh is not the single largest get out the vote operation. And by that, I'm using that as an illustration to point out the fact that we've been dealing with for decades a massive right-wing media echo chamber that has not just been an amplifier of lies and false narratives and misinformation, but has also repeatedly beaten up the press such that they, in an attempt to inoculate themselves from cries of bias, have actually started to privilege all kinds of misinformation, false narratives, and worse, have sort of adopted a double standard as a matter of course. And there's all kinds of examples of that. I mean, in the weeks after Donald Trump became the presumptive nominee, he didn't do any sit-down interviews except for one with Fox. He sat with Fox. But he didn't do a real interview with a reporter. There wasn't any clamoring in the press asking why he wasn't doing interviews. Yet there have been clamorings this week and attacks and criticisms of Harris that somehow she's not doing something from major publications by not sitting down for an interview. That's a double standard. Or how about back in May when Donald Trump reportedly made an offer to oil executives to spend $1 billion on ads. In exchange, he would roll back a whole bunch of environmental policies. The only network, national network, that covered that was MSNBC. And then if you look on social media, every single major news channel and news operation that week on their social media channels covered the fact that Vice President Harris said the F word, but not a single one of them talked about that deal and that report about Donald Trump. So I think that's really what's going on here. They're confused and disoriented, and there's also some muscle memory here that has been built up over decades.